Yeah, let's go from the bottom up. Phone call one day from a student who I had worked with when I was a principal in Dubai. And he said, "Hey, my dad wants to launch a new international school in Palestine, and he'd like you to make a bid and tender on the project to set up and launch that school." I was fascinated and curious. And of course, I already knew a lot about Palestine because of the decades of conflict. And I was really interested in the project. So we made a successful bid and we were appointed to do the project. And of course, then we headed on over to Palestine. People often ask me, how do you start a brand new project, particularly in a unique place like Palestine? And it's funny, it very much is a pioneering entrepreneurial project. Like you're starting from nothing. I remember jumping on LinkedIn and trying to find anyone at all that I could find that lived or worked in Palestine. And I contacted the CEOs of Coca-Cola and a lot of the businesses in Ramallah and told them that we were planning to set up a school and how I'd like to meet them and get their advice and ideas about how we might do that. And of course, I flew into Tel Aviv and then traveled across the land border into Palestine and started our work there. And over the first couple of weeks, I just spent time going out and meeting people, meeting industry, meeting company CEOs. I was this crazy Australian who just landed in Ramallah and had this plan to set up a school funded by an investor from Dubai, and was out there meeting people, trying to figure out how best to approach that. And then, of course, very, very quickly, I was invited into homes. I had lovely meals with families. I got to know the true culture of Palestine and what people were facing there. And I think what's really crazy is people tend to understand Palestine from the perspective of the media and what they hear about the major conflict between Israel and the Palestinians without really understanding the true people that live there. I broke bread and spent lots of time with families there who were Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and we had a wonderful time together. And none of them want the conflict. All of them just want all what they want is a better life. And I love spending several months there trying to understand them and how best shape up an international school that was going to meet their needs. Was it challenging? Absolutely. I remember one day looking out the window and observing for 20 minutes or more a young child learning how to throw stones. And I'm not sure if you've seen the things on television about or videos about Palestinians who are throwing rocks at, at the at the Israelis. And I watched it in awe, just realizing that these young children don't know anything else, and that's all they've been doing for decades. And I realized how important it was to have an international school that was going to create informed citizens. And informed citizens are critical thinkers who make good decisions. We don't tell people what to think, but we help teach children how to think. And it was a very exciting project and something a place that I learned a lot about people and humanity, and something I'll treasure forever. Um, it wasn't our first. Hi, my name is Greg Parry, and I work internationally, setting up and operating international schools in different parts of the world. I'd like to share some experiences about our recent time in Saudi Arabia, where we spent a lot of our time working on a number of education, school, university projects, and the significant transformation that's happening in the kingdom. One of the things that fascinates me most about Saudi Arabia is when you talk to the people about their leadership and they talk about the prince, they talk about 2030 vision and they revere him as a leader because they don't consider the 2030 vision as necessarily a vision or a mission, but a plan that's going to get done. And I think that's really rare to consider a country that's going to go through so much transformation. And they really are over delivering already on the promises. Of course, they've got a long way to go with decades and decades of different perspectives and different ideas about how schools should operate and how a community should operate. But it's amazing to see the transformations. When I first came here a few years back, I assumed that women would have a lot more restrictions than they do now. Certainly, I spend time in restaurants and coffee shops, mixing freely with people of both gender and families and singles and married people without any major restrictions. My wife Shanna wears the same clothes in Saudi Arabia as she would in any other country of the world without any restrictions that we perceived might exist. Setting up international schools is really interesting. And what's important is to have your eyes open and your ears listening for everything and understanding things. One of the things I found interesting is there's been a lot of international school operators that have come into the kingdom, planning to bring in their Western culture, planning to bring in what they describe as international education, this new perspective to a country that needs it, without really understanding what's happening. It's really important to understand that you can change rules and you can change laws, but cultural matters take extra time. I hear people talking about bringing in co-educational classes and mixed gender classes and how excited they are that this is going to be the transformation that the kingdom needs, without realizing that in our own cultures in Australia, America, Canada, US, we often have single sex classes because research proves that there are cases where girls or boys do much better with single sex classes. So we come to Saudi Arabia with a very different perspective, an important belief that you need to listen and learn and understand culture. And the transformations need to be about maximizing learning for kids. The transformations need to be about providing a high quality education that's going to be better than it was before, not imposing a Western culture on the kingdom, and creating the very, very best opportunities we can for young people. So it's a really exciting time to be here in Saudi Arabia. It's a very, very different place to what people would expect. The international franchises, restaurants, and food chains are quite incredible. And we really love spending time here, and we are very excited to be involved in this massive transformation. Okay. Yeah, no, it's pretty open. Hi, my name is Greg Parry, and I'm an Australian who works internationally, setting up and operating international schools in different parts of the world. I lived in China for 8 years, and I had a fascinating time for a large part of that, some projects we worked with the oldest living descendant of Confucius, Mr. Kong. And I could tell you stories for hours about the times that we spent with him. From an educational perspective, it was very, very interesting because what we did is we created a curriculum that connected the best of British curriculum, the best of American curriculum, and the Confucius Analects. And that was really fascinating because academically it was about creating two pathways so that students could go on to the UK or US, or other countries of the world for their higher education. But also it was about infusing the cultural heritage of China, which is something that we also really believed in for Chinese residents. We also really love the idea that it was a best of the best approach. People often say to me, what's the best curriculum? And I often say, look, it depends on the context and where it is, but there's great things about all curriculum. We infuse international baccalaureate curriculum within British schools and American schools as well. So it was great to bring together the best of those approaches, as well as the formal pathways, and to really understand these perspectives of Confucius, which was several hundred years old. So that was a fascinating time. Mr. Kong was a character. He was a party guy. We spent lots of time having incredible food and sometimes maybe partying too hard. But he was a very, very generous man. We would get frustrated with him at times, but on reflection, most of it was about a different cultural perspective. His idea about education was very, very different to ours. He would sometimes, he would turn up at maybe at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday and suddenly call an assembly of the whole school because he had some dignitaries in town in tow that he wanted to show off the school to. So we would have to stop classes at 10 o'clock and then, bring everyone to an assembly so we could show off his students and his school to the dignitaries. And we would then spend a lot of time afterwards trying to help him understand how you only achieve high academic standards and get kids into Harvard and Cambridge if you really work hard and you don't have these kind of interruptions. So that was something we had to spend a bit of time trying to help him understand. But he was a fascinating man who was very generous to us. I remember one time we traveled to the US with him to attend a conference, and my wife Shanna's parents joined us in Seattle to attend that conference. And he knew that it was their recent wedding anniversary. And so unbeknownst to his wife, Mr. Kong's wife, was a jeweler. And unbeknownst to us, he had a special gift that he presented to Shanna's mum, which was a string of pearls and diamonds that uh, were symbolic, of course, related to the anniversary. The diamonds symbolic of connection to the Argyle diamonds in Australia, and he would do these things from time to time, showing such generosity and goodwill towards people. So as much as we got frustrated with him in the ways that were definitely related to different culture, we loved spending time with him, and we have treasured memories that will last forever in the relation to that particular project. Hi, my name is Greg Parry. I'm an Australian who works overseas, setting up and operating international schools in different parts of the world. One of the most fascinating projects we ever worked on was a new school project in Palestine. And of course, I'd never been there. It's a unique and interesting place. And the project was being launched by the family or the father of a student that I had worked with in our school in Dubai. And at the time, my wife Shannon and I were working in Beijing, and he flew us from Beijing to Jordan, where we were then going to travel across the land border from Jordan into Palestine. And of course, we knew him and we knew his son, and the plan was to meet his son at the hotel in Jordan with some other people. Then we were going to travel across the border to Palestine, to Ramallah. At this stage of the project, not a lot had been done. It was a brand new school that we were planning to create, but we were going to a special event where we were going to meet the the governor of Ramallah, the prime minister of Palestine, and other dignitaries to basically, you know, to commence the project at the construction site in a very symbolic kind of ceremony. So we landed at the hotel and we went to bed that night. And the next morning at breakfast, we met up with the son of the investor, and it was great to catch up with him. And then we met two other journalists that also were traveling to the project. One of them was from the UK, and one of them was, I believe, from Switzerland. And of course, we had only met these journalists for the first time, and we would then travel together by land through the border. Now, the son, he reminded us that, of course, he was Palestinian, so he would have to go through a slightly different checkpoint to us. I mean, he might take longer because of the challenges of checkpoints going into Palestine. And we said that's okay, no problem at all. Now, remember, I'm Australian, Shanna is American. The two journalists are from the UK and I think Switzerland, and and the son was from Palestine. So we head off into the border check, and of course, we got stuck for several hours. But what was fascinating was the questions that we were asked. They said, well, where are you going? We said, we're going to Ramallah, to Palestine. What are you going there for? Well, we're going to set up a new school. What's the name of the school? We don't know. We haven't named the school yet. What hotel are you staying in? Um, I don't know. We're meeting someone there and they're going to take us to the hotel. When did you first meet? We met at breakfast this morning in our hotel in Jordan. Okay. Then they of course turned to the other two. So you're journalists. Why are you here as journalists? Why? How come you're here? And why are you involved? And of course they had their own stories to tell. They of course went through everybody's social media to screen everything, and it's a fascinating, fun story that went on for hours and hours. And to be honest, we weren't stressed in any way. At no time were we fearful of our safety, but we understood the humorous situation. It sounded absolutely ridiculous that this Australian, American, British and Swiss person and a person from Palestine all met over breakfast and then was suddenly going into Ramallah to create a school that hadn't even been named existed. Didn't know what hotel we were going to, didn't even have the phone number of the owner. It was just crazy. So we understand why we were a difficult catch. We understood why we were there for several hours, but eventually we got through. And of course, we've got that story to tell. But thankfully, we stayed calm. Everything was fine. But it was a fascinating story that we can tell about border crossings in and out of Palestine. So, yeah, a fascinating, fun time. Wow. Yeah, cool. Because we were traveling with his son, he had all the details. He was in another room, so he knew his father's phone number. We didn't. He knew the hotel, but we didn't. It was just I can I can see why they thought we were crazy. Like, what are you doing here? So yeah. Hi, my name is Greg Parry. I'm an Australian and I work internationally, setting up. Hi, my name is Greg Parry, and I'm Australian, and I work internationally, setting up and operating international schools in different parts of the world. I'm 55 years of age, and I've now traveled to 64 different countries of the world, which is a lot. But to be honest, I think back to when I first traveled, which is in the year 2000, 25 years ago. And the first country that I landed in was Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City. Um, when I think back, it's quite crazy because what I did back then, of course, Lonely Planet was very, very popular. And I'd watch the Lonely Planet TV shows, and I had the Lonely Planet books. I had a bunch of Lonely Planet books, and that's how I started the backpacking adventure, which is what us Australians do. And I'd read all the stories about Ho Chi Minh City and arrived in Ho Chi Minh or Saigon. And I read the stories that when you land at the airport, be very, very careful because when you come out of the airport, the taxi drivers are going to be there. And when you tell them what hotel you want to go to that you've already booked into, they're all going to tell you that the hotel is closed. They're going to tell you that the hotel closed just last week and they'll take you to a different hotel. So I was ready. And of course, I arrived and I was very, very nervous and scared because I'd never traveled before in my life. And there, as expected, there's all the taxi drivers. And I said, take me to this hotel. And of course, they went on with their normal spiel and said, no, no, that hotel closed last week. And I said, no, I've heard this story before. That's not true. I want you to take me to this hotel. No, please trust me, sir. No, it's true. And they gave me this elaborate story and said, that hotel closed down just last week, but we can take you to a different hotel that is cheap. And my friend has it. I said, okay. And of course, I got sucked in. It didn't matter how much I'd read these stories before, but I was so scared. I was just frozen with fear at this crazy country, which, of course, at that time, back in 2000, was dirt roads and full of cyclos and motorbikes and noisy cars. And I was just petrified. So it didn't matter what I'd been told. I just went, okay. So I jumped in the car, and instead of paying $5 a night in that hotel, I paid $25 a night. So I got to the hotel and I was just petrified. So I went upstairs. I was very, very hungry, but there's no way that I was going to go and find food. There's no way. I'm in a brand new country. I've never traveled before. So I went upstairs to the hotel. I eventually fell asleep, again, just totally petrified. And the next morning, of course, I woke up to the honking of horns and the normal sounds of Saigon, which still exist today, but back then they were louder and even more primitive. I laid in bed for probably a couple of hours before I eventually had the courage to walk downstairs after I've had my cold shower and my very, very hard bed. I had breakfast downstairs, which of course was a Vietnamese coffee and a baguette and some cheese. And then I looked out the window, and there, of course, was a cyclo driver who'd been waiting out there all morning for me to come. Oh, Greg, come out here. Greg, let me take you somewhere. And of course, I'd read the stories in Lonely Planet as well that you don't listen to the cyclo drivers. You make sure that you have a very clear picture of where you want to go. And eventually I had the courage to walk outside and not follow that cyclo driver and find somebody else that would take me to exactly to the same hotel that I meant to go to the night before, but of course was convinced that it was otherwise closed. So I checked out of my hotel, paid my $25, checked out of my hotel, went to the hotel I was supposed to go to, checked into that one, paying $5 a night, and continued my journey. But I guess I tell you this story because as a seasoned traveler now, I was really stressed. I was frozen with fear. And when people travel for the first time, they have these kind of experiences as well. And for years, I've given advice to my family and friends, and that is that if you're not sure what to do nothing. Just stop. We feel like we need to be in a hurry. We have to make a decision. There's a taxi driver or a cyclo driver or someone that's trying to convince you to do something that maybe is not the best choice. Just pause, stop, sit down, have a cup of coffee, go back to your guidebook, jump on the internet, read things through because you don't need to act straight away. You can think it through and come up with a better plan. But as someone that's been to 64 different countries, I can tell you some sad stories where I got sucked into and made some mistakes. But I live to tell the tale. I love traveling, but it's funny now to reflect back that there was a time when I was fearful and had culture shock too. But now, thankfully, I can do all sorts of crazy things with much greater levels of comfort. Yeah.